Hello and welcome to the Purpose Cycle podcast, the podcast that gives you impactful practices to build towards fruition and fulfillment. Here's a taste of what we've got in store for you today. These skills were something that was needed for me. So I found out first of all what skills are relevant to what I want to achieve. So what I've done is looking at the calendar, I've booked a date in which I've set myself a deadline to acquire the skills, and it makes me accountable. So to problem solve doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it by yourself, but it could be that you ask someone for help later down the line. I really hope that you enjoy the very first episode of the Purpose Cycle podcast, all based on skill acquisition. Hello growth seekers, my name is Jonathan Tucker and I'm an educator based in the UK, and this podcast is something that I've been building towards for a number of years now. I've been studying self-development as a hobby for over 10 years. I've now built up a wealth of experience from ups and downs, victories and defeats, gains and losses, and I feel like now is the perfect time for me to launch my podcast and really build something. The main aim of the podcast is to provide impact and something that you can use to build upon your life and ultimately achieve fruition and fulfillment. Brain plasticity is what drives me, and I believe that learning is never complete. For our first episode, I'm going to talk about skill acquisition. Okay, so first of all, what is skill acquisition? Well, the acquisition of a skill is a type of learning in which repetition results in enduring changes in an individual's capability to perform a specific task. Any behaviour that needs to be learned and that is improved by practice can be considered a skill. So with that in mind then, as well as the classic motor skills that you would use when maybe learning how to play football or playing golf, or even just learning to ride a bike and to walk, what differs from physical motor skills to cognitive motor skills, and also the wide range of different skills in between. What I'm going to do today is review a couple of tips that I've learned myself through the coronavirus lockdowns, for example, and also talk about 5 skills from Simon Sinek that he recommends that all millennials crucially need to learn. But to be honest, looking at the skills themselves, I think we could all do with a little bit of an improvement in, and you might agree so too. Remember, if you do enjoy the podcast, remember to subscribe to it for more updates, because there's going to be weekly episodes and also lots and lots of guests that you can listen to pick apart their key points and make an impact and a difference to your own practice. So for me, skill acquisition, obviously it says about it being repeated over time, and that really resonated with me, because you're not ever going to, unless you're very, very lucky and blessed with either amazing genetics or amazing talent, you're never really going to achieve something or master a skill in its first practice. It needs to be repeated over time, and I know there's a lot of talk about the 10,000 hours of practice, but that is for true mastery, world-class level, and it might be that the acquisition of a skill may not take that long for you to get relatively good at it, or good enough to be successful either in your workplace or in your personal life. Now, for me, what I found essential was that these skills were something that was needed for me. So I found out first of all what skills are relevant to what I want to achieve. Now, I'd always wanted to start this podcast, and this was something that I wanted to build towards for a number of years now. So I had to be honest with myself, and that is what I would say is the first step for anybody who's listening who wants to develop further in skill acquisition. They have to obviously look at themselves in the mirror. That could be metaphorically if you wanted to, lying down at night and just being honest with yourself and reflecting and thinking about what skills I need in order to progress with what I want to do. And like I said before, it could be in your personal life, or even could be in the workplace. And then once you've noted down the skills that you believe are essential, it's then time to put those into action and work towards them. Now, there's a number of ways you can do this, but one way that I found it particularly effective is by forcing myself into action initially. So what I've done is looking at the calendar, I've booked a date in which I've set myself a deadline to acquire those skills, and it makes me accountable. Now, if you're quite vague with this and you say, right, by the 1st of May, I want to be an excellent public speaker, that gives you too much leeway to sort of fall at, one of the many hurdles in between. So what I found extremely useful was that I forced myself into action by actually doing something with that. So I ensured that I wanted to be better at public speaking, and at the end of it, I wanted to start a podcast with one of my friends, which I do, relating to our local football team. And with this in mind, I knew that ultimately I wanted to get to this point where I'm doing this podcast for you guys. But to practice this, I would almost appear on or present another podcast. So once you've obviously forced yourself into that sort of situation, it might be that you volunteer to give yourself a presentation. I've put myself in many of those situations as well. They're sort of mini tasks that you can build up along the way. So it might be that you are, wanting to become a better public speaker because you've got a best man speech to give in a number of months. So how are you going to achieve that? Well, thankfully, you've already been forced into action because you've been asked to do it, and the deadline is already set. So what you need to do is think about little milestones along the way, which will help you assess how far you've come, because that's really important as well. In these long-term goals, what are your short-term gains? So it could be that you volunteer to deliver a presentation at work just to see how well you've improved at public speaking. It could be to appear on a YouTube video or a podcast. It could be even as simple as ringing up local radio and voicing your opinion on the local sports team. Any of these would be fantastic in order to assess how far you've come in between. And the other thing as well, it's important to ask others how far you've come. So you can maybe ask them, what did you think of my public speaking then? Do you think I've improved since I've started my journey? What areas do you think I need to work on in order to get better? On all of these, you need to be very receptive to the feedback, and you need to be quite open to it as well, because sometimes feedback you can take quite personally, but what you need to understand is most of these people are trying to benefit you. So they're giving you nice, honest feedback, and it's important that you accept that in order to create an environment in which people feel comfortable giving you feedback as well, because that's one of the only ways that you're truly going to get better at a skill. Tim Ferriss once said, the only true job security is a superior skill set. So it's not just in one particular skill where you might need to shine and excel. It might be in a number of skills. So what you need to do is maybe make a list of all of the things that surround that main skill as an umbrella term. For example, public speaking would be the main skill, and I'm using it as an example because I've gone through this journey myself. And when enrolling on a public speaking course, there's many free courses online that you can enroll on, and this was one of them. And I found that it had lots of different elements to it, such as body language, how you are projecting your voice, keeping the readers or listeners interested by telling a story, and all of those different elements to it. Now, you need to also look at that for your own skill. So what elements do I need surrounding that will ultimately lift up the skill set that I have here? So those are the tips there that I learned from obviously acquiring new skills, and then I had to put these into practice. And obviously, like I said before, for a number of years I've wanted to start the Purpose Cycle podcast, even though I might not have known the name at the time. And I looked at different skills that I'd practiced across the years, and this kind of presentation or presenting it skill has come from first of all starting a YouTube channel a couple of years ago in which I did golf videos, and this was merely, like I say, a fun hobby, and it gave me the chance to have a look at editing and putting together content, speaking to a camera and feeling comfortable in front of an audience. And I did this because at work my confidence levels in terms of speaking publicly were not great, and as a teacher I felt like that was something that needed fixing. I felt really nervous even when delivering an assembly to 300 children. Now, if I couldn't deliver an assembly in front of children confidently, I felt like I wasn't able to truly achieve my goals in the workplace. So what I had to do was start this YouTube channel, get better at that, because if I could then speak to a camera first, I could then build up to speaking to a live audience. But like I said before, those skills such as editing clips and creating content are fantastic as well, because it builds a holistic skill yourself. And once I did that, I started looking at enrolling in CPD to get myself qualified, because if I was qualified higher in certain aspects, I could deliver training to teachers, and that in turn helped me develop my skills further. Even though it was in a completely separate environment, I knew that it would help me when making this podcast. Once I did that, I was able to take on a new role as the ICT, Information Communications Technology Lead at my school, which involved a lot of technology, computers, those sorts of things. And I had to clue myself up, first of all, making sure my knowledge was really sound on that subject. Then I was able to use the public speaking skills that I developed across the years to be able to deliver effective training. Now I was confident in doing that. It felt like taking the assemblies was pretty much a doddle, and that was great because it allowed me to see how far I've come. People couldn't believe that I was a nervous person who could really get worked up before delivering an assembly in front of children. Now, what you've also got to remember is throughout all of these stages, you'll always level up. But the first new step of that chapter may not always be the best. My first assembly was awful. My first YouTube video was awful. My first ever podcast, I can look back and now say it was awful. And I'll probably look back on this podcast when I'm listening to it in a few years' time, reflecting, thinking, wow, this is truly awful. But that's because you are leveling up to a point in which you look back on yourselves and you cannot believe how far you have come. So it's always important to know that you're not going to get it perfect the first time. And when you look back on it in a few years, if you've stuck with it and you've remained consistent, you'll be very, very surprised and think, wow, it really wasn't as good as I thought it was, but in a good way, in a positive way. So now looking to Simon Sinek, and he's a leader and really somebody as a role model who I look up to when developing myself personally, and he was really one of those first key figures in my personal development journey. And he talks about 5 skills that millennials, but everybody, to be honest, can learn in order to maximize their overall skill set. So if you can be good at these, this can help harness you into developing skills from other areas and becoming ultimately better learners and better team players and even better leaders. So the first one is to solve problems. And obviously we all want to make impact, we all want to be positive, and we all want to, be stood up and counted for, whether it's in the workplace or in our personal lives. And we need to be good at solving problems to do this. Now, depending on your upbringing, some of you will have been exposed to solving problems when you were quite young and given tasks and being sort of taught that resilience. But others, mainly sort of the younger generation now, and I've seen this myself working in schools, are not as good at solving problems because they don't have that stickability factor and they're not resilient enough to solve problems. They see a problem and they immediately ask for help. And this is because quite a lot of the time parents will just find it easier to do it for them rather than to ask them to think critically and find a way around the issue. Now, to demonstrate true leadership potential, you'll need to have initiative to find solutions on your own. You have to be proactive, but you also need to know when to ask for help and communicate at the right times. So to problem solve doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it by yourself, but it could be that you ask someone for help later down the line, okay? And being a team player is really key, because once you cross the finish line together as a team, they will really feel like part of your journey. And if leading is something that you want to do, then I would highly recommend being able to work and solve problems both as an individual and in a team. Okay, the second skill from Simon Sinek is to follow through. Now, millennials have a reputation for job hopping. They want to start a project and then they drop out after a couple of weeks or a couple of days. I've even heard of millennials dropping out after their first shift because it's just not for them. But in order to stick with something, like I said before, and follow through with an action, then you have to complete a task. It might be that you hate this job. It might be that you don't like to take part in this project or even write this essay. But the important thing is that you get through the other side, because it shows you that you have patience and that you can stick with something even when the going gets tough. Now, if you have the impatience in something so minuscule in your early life, then when something greater pops up later on in life, which is essential that you show patience and time management and even that sort of perseverance when something is difficult or maybe not enjoyable, then it will ultimately come back to haunt you. So being a leader means to take responsibility for a team, both the people and the work. So if people around you are quite negative and you want to leave because they're not the kind of people you want to be around, then you need to take responsibility for them and show by example, but also never fight negative with negative, because it just does not work. You need to approach everything with a positive mindset, because then others around you will be inspired, quite possibly see that even though this person is overqualified, yet they are still looking to be the best they can be in this area. They will follow you, because if you lead by example, naturally people around you will follow that excellent attitude. Now for a quick message from our sponsor. Suit Up Apparel is a new menswear company who provide customers with a compelling range of products that combine looking amazing with comfort. The team at Suit Up Apparel know how testing the day-to-day grind can be, so they have focused their collections around one simple phrase: look great, perform even better. Suit Up are offering new customers 20% off their first order with the code WELCOME20, but don't worry, the Purpose Cycle podcast listeners can get 10% off future orders by using the code PURPOSE at checkout as well. Go on to suitupapparel.co.uk, that's suitupapparel.co.uk to see the fantastic products on offer, and remember to stay sharp and suit up. The third rule from Simon Sinek is to receive feedback. Now, I understand that some people who are coming into the sort of big wide world of work are not used to receiving feedback before. It might be extremely positive, praise heavy feedback from school teachers, and then they're coming into a world of business which is a little bit more brutal, and with leaders who have been in the job for quite some time, so they could be quite old school. But this doesn't mean that you react negatively to feedback because you cannot take that harsh criticism that's just said how it is from the business owners. What you need to be able to do is be accountable first of all for your own performance. So reflect and think, was this the best possible performance I could give at work? Or in your personal life it could be something else. And if somebody from a leadership position or somebody in general who's just giving you feedback gives you something that you don't quite expect to hear, that doesn't mean that you sort of shy away from that or disregard it. You need to think about why they have said that. Now, I must admit, I have been guilty of this before. Somebody saying something to me and thinking, they're just against me. They don't want me to succeed. But when you take a step back and look at it, you can use that energy to channel, again, your development and prove them wrong. Bury them with results. But you can only do that if you are able to receive feedback positively, accept what has been said to you, and take ownership and accountability of your shortcomings. Simon Sinek's fourth skill is to be able to give credit. And this is also something that I never really thought about before reading for my research in terms of this podcast. And Simon Sinek's suggestion of giving credit is definitely something that we need to be better at in general. Now, it's quite often where you may have had a boss before in your life when you have accomplished something or you have an idea, and that person in a trusted leadership role almost steals that away from you and takes credit for it themselves. Now, what you need to remember is that it says a lot more about that person than it does about you, and that doesn't mean that you become that person. Simon Sinek talks about being the leader that you wish you had, and if you can give credit where it's due to other people, that will ultimately inspire them to work harder for you. It's also important to share credit on team projects. So those people who are maybe a little bit more shy and not negative towards the team project, but maybe didn't take as much of a forefront as you did, it's important to also give them credit, because no matter how much or little they contributed, they were still part of that team. And to recognise a joint team effort, that ensures that they in the future would go above and beyond for you. It builds trust within your team, and for me and for bosses watching obviously you lead a team, it shows them that you are demonstrating true leadership potential. And the final skill that Simon Sinek suggests that we all improve at, millennials especially, is to be able to disconnect from technology. Now, this is something that he talks about quite a lot in many of his interviews, and I've seen it with Tom Bilyeu as well, where he says to him about the fact that in meetings he bans mobile phones. If you are attached to your devices and you're sort of resisting that urge all the time, it might even be something as simple as getting your phone out your pocket, checking the time, and putting your phone back in your pocket, or maybe scrolling on your Apple Watch to see if there's been any notifications. That sends out all of the wrong signals to the people around you, whether it's in your personal life or your working life. For me, if I was in a group and there was one person in that group constantly checking their phone, or even leaving their phone up on a table face up, that tells me that they're not truly engaged with being present in the room. They want to be somewhere else, or they are hoping for communication from somewhere else. So if you want to send off that sort of signal, then obviously that's what you have to do. But I'm sure that the rest of you want to make sure that you are present in the room and that you are focusing your full attention to your teammates, your friends, your colleagues. As frustrating as it might be to obviously not be able to access your technology all the time, or to have to maybe cut off communication temporarily, you need to make sure you give somebody your full attention by looking them in the eye, accepting their points, even small gestures like saying their name. That's a great point, Darren. I think that we should do this, would definitely give that person that more confidence and be able to approach you a little bit easier next time you need to have a conversation. Now, just before we finish the episode, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things I did during the UK first coronavirus lockdown in order to build up my skills. Now, I was still working at the time when delivering lessons and teaching, but I was doing this virtually because the schools had closed down in the United Kingdom. And although obviously I was still teaching, I had to work from home due to being asthmatic, so I was asked to shield for 12 weeks away from the workplace. Now, during these 12 weeks, I was stuck in a lot at home, and I had one of two ways to react to the situation. I could have said, well, I'm still doing my job, I'm still being asked to work, and I have to stay at home. This is great. I can, take the foot off the gas, be lazy, and just enjoy chilling out. But I thought to myself, no, I can go out for 30 minutes exercise a day, which I try to do quite a lot. But the main thing I wanted to improve in terms of fitness was my mental fitness. So in terms of building up my skills, I thought, if I'm not mentally strong, mentally capable to learn at an optimal level, then my learning will not be as effective ultimately. So a couple of things I decided to do. First of all was I needed to read more. So I've always been quite an avid podcast listener to various podcasts on Spotify and other platforms. And I've always been an avid watcher of YouTube videos to try and learn more. But what I wasn't as good at was reading. And my sleep patterns weren't great because I wasn't getting out of the house that much. So I was, being quite lethargic. And I thought reading would really help that as well. So I challenged myself to read 3 books, which I managed to do. And I found that from reading, I learned a great deal about my particular areas of interest, such as leadership, public speaking, motivation, and all of those different areas. But B, my sleep improved because I wasn't on a device as much late at night. I was reading, and that settled me down and was able to drift into sleep easier, which then in turn made me more productive. But also C, I was able to absorb information easier from other areas. So my concentration, my focus was a little bit more honed in, and I could just absorb information. I felt extra productive. It really did build my mental fitness. And it was almost for me a form of meditation, of where I could just be very, very quiet, and I can take on information. And it wasn't something that really was forceful. It was something that I looked forward to on a night, and I had a specific set time, and it kept me in that routine during a really difficult period of lockdown. And to be honest, my physical exercise did suffer quite a little bit during the lockdown because gyms were closed, and that was my main area of fitness interests. So it was important for me to build up mental stamina and mental fitness by doing lots of reading. So that concludes our very first episode of the Purpose Cycle podcast. Thank you very much for listening to that and my take on skill acquisition. If you enjoyed it, please hit subscribe, and also you can comment on our Instagram, which is in the description, about some of the lessons that you learned and some of the things that you took from that episode. I'd be really interested to hear that from you guys. And remember, stay tuned over the coming weeks, as we are set to provide you with brand new episodes to help give you impact and fulfillment into your lives. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Watch me not stop though.